Spectacular.
Yo, what's up, Fire Tribe? Welcome to another Sunday Slow Burn. I'm Danny Unaki Dan.
I'm the homie Romy. Hello.
And
I'm Indy
as
Sage.
always,
What's
joining
happening,
us.
y'all?
Hey, Indy.
How's it
What
going?
up? Going well.
Nice.
You guys
How you
ready
guys
to
doing?
bite down on some vampires?
Clamping
Oh,
on them.
yeah.
Got these
Clamping
jaws
on 'em
wide
hard,
open.
dog.
Yes.
Uh-oh.
Okay.
I'm interested to see what you guys found because I
Telegram.
listened to a book.
If you guys want
I
to
listened
join
to a
in,
book
it's
called
there.
Vampire Case Files. And it was pretty interesting. It kind of elaborated on the history and the myth of the vampire and where they came from and how it all started.
Got the lowdown.
Yeah, I think
Oh, yeah.
what's interesting about it from the book is that a lot of the vampire myth started basically as a scapegoat because they didn't really understand medical anything.
True.
So they weren't burying bodies deep enough, and so they were hearing moaning and groaning and thinking that the person was still alive. And then they'd go to dig them up, and they didn't know like rigor mortis only lasts for so many days, and then sometimes the body could get swelled up with blood, and so they'd poke at it and then it'd bleed, and then they immediately thought, oh, well, they are coming out of their grave and sucking other people's blood, so they must be vampires. So it's pretty funny. That's kind of why it involves the casket with the vampires, is because they used to dig up vampires from the grave, people that they thought could be vampires, because there was like a hysteria around like these pagan ideas and people dying and coming back. There was like a history of like vampires would come back and sleep with their wives, so their wives would be in bed and they'd say they got visited by their passed away husband and they would have sex with them. So
what?
Yeah, so people were like, "Oh, well, they're a vampire then." And I guess there was like a common saying that the vampire only comes back for his family. He'll come back to try to get them or bring them to the other side or whatnot. So a lot of these myths started with like just hysteria and improper burial practices.
Yeah, it's interesting. The folklore ties heavily to shows that they have like a really strong sense of loyalty. Like, they would go back for their families and specifically their partners. And then they would try to do things almost to like protect. It's kind of like where I was finding a lot of really interesting ties is, it kind of goes into the bloodlines, the family bloodlines, like keeping, because a lot of times, there was a lot of first cousins sleeping with each other, and through that just created some interesting tendencies to have almost devilish types of ways. It looks like we have another sire joining us. It looks like we have another sire joining us. Mark,
check it
from
out.
Family Thinks I'm Crazy.
Welcome, Mark.
Hey,
What's up, Mark?
What's up, Dan? Good to see you. Good to see you again,
How's it
Indy
going?
Sage. I think you were here last time I was here, right? And then Roman. What's up, brother?
Hey, baby. Thanks for joining, man.
It's been a good day today. Somebody sent me
Nice.
some Delta 8 gummies. I don't know who sent them,
Ooh.
but taking them is not helping me remember. I'll tell you that.
I hear that.
Anyways, glad to be here on this Sunday slow burn. Roman, you look clean shaven. Did you have facial hair? You look different.
I know, man. I know it's crazy when you cut it off, but it's totally a thing, and I did, and it was one of those moments where I was like, did I regret this automatically? A little bit, but we'll
Yes.
see it back in a couple weeks
Always
here.
regret shaving the beard, right?
Yes,
Yeah,
and
me too.
cutting the
Speaking to
hair.
my beard fellows here.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't recognize myself without it. Sometimes it takes a little while to get used to.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna pull up some tabs here in the background, and we can kind of swap stories and swap blood if you guys are down. Indy, I know you had a very
Yeah.
you were this was pretty synchronistic that we were kind of going into this topic, right? You said that you and your partner were having some you guys just watched the Dracula movie, which makes sense. It's that time of the year, which is
Yeah.
kind of why we're doing this theme. But can you want to get us rolling and going on what your vampiric connection is?
Yeah, it was an amazing experience, man. We watched Dracula Untold, which came out, I believe, very recently, maybe a year or two ago, and it's a great rendition of the story. I was with my lady here.
Hey, how are you?
And she's been going through some hip pain, and she's got a little trouble on her shoulder as well.
I have an impale mark right here.
She does, right
What's up,
there.
Mario? What's up, Shannon?
Yeah. So
Impale
we've been
mark.
wondering, like, what is this from? And she's been going through so many different modalities to heal herself, like, therapy, massage, different spiritual modalities and stuff. And we just can't get under this thing. Usually I can heal people like in a day if I put my heart into it and take their hurt and their pain or their condition into my heart and transmute that into love, give their energy back to them. But with her, I've just been hitting walls. And I knew that there was some kind of deep-seated ancestral trauma involved in this as the root.
Yes.
So after we watched that film, we started to go through some shadow work, some Jungian shadow work, and get in touch with some of the trauma in her inner turmoil that's been transmuted in this life with certain triggers and stuff. So we started to realize that there's some triggers there of neglect, abandonment, and betrayal, things of the sort. And then we started to go into some past life regression. We uncovered the fact that she was staked with a pike from through her shoulder and out her pelvis through her hip, which is where all of her pain is residing.
Yeah.
And I've been able to feel that energy. We were thinking something impaled her there. We thought maybe it was a sword that came through. But when we realized that it was connected with the shoulder, after having watched that movie, we started to realize, man, she was staked with a pike. And, as Vlad Tepes the Impaler, also known as Prince Dracul, son of the dragon, was known to have impaled people on pikes. He impaled an entire village of 20,000 people named Amlas, the village. It was the people where not only the men, it was the wives and all the children as well were all staked on pikes there. So there's a lot of people from his reign and all of that heartless mess that he created that have endured ancestral traumas from that.
It's like the tarot reading we did right before the show. Tons of like wands just sticking up, the 6 of wands, victorious. Just tons of like, it was what? The 4 of wands, the tower, the 6 of wands. Yeah.
Yeah, we asked the tarot cards.
Are vampires real?
Are vampires real?
Yeah.
And the first off, we got a king sitting by his throne, king of the cups, drinking blood.
Yep.
Right. And then we had the tower, right? The famous tower where his bride jumped off because she thought he was dead.
Yeah.
Or maybe escaping villains that had intruded on the tower. And then what was the other one that came
The 4 of wands.
And the 4 of
which
wands.
Which is homecoming, so going into villages.
These wands and a castle right behind them.
Castle behind
the homecoming. So he comes home to find his bride dead and goes on like decades of vengeance.
Yeah.
Against the Turks, the Ottoman Empire, Muslims, lots of different people that he was up against.
Seems to be the case, man. That there's seems to be computer robot boy over here. Seems to be the case, you know, when some of the characters I got really hooked into looking up this topic were definite people of power. Some of these characters that some might consider to be reptilians, right? Like we're talking the royal family, they had such practices of, you know, doing things with their slaves and their workers on the courts. Oh, that's the draw?
Yeah, so I mean, if that's not Vlad the Impaler, I don't know what is. The King of Cups, the Tower, the Four of Wands, the Six of Wands. I mean, look at all the spikes. Battle.
Oh,
you know, cups.
Yeah.
I mean, motion.
Yeah.
What's up, Mercury? Mel?
Yeah, pretty strong.
Yep. So that was intense.
Yeah.
So yeah, but we got the impression when you do past life regressions, you get a download within like sometimes 20 minutes or less of an entire lifetime. And we got the impression that it was actually not that she was a victim of the Vlad the Impaler, but she was actually Vlad the Impaler's bride. And I felt like I was Vlad the Impaler in the experience, coming home to find my bride being like staked up and she was still alive after having fallen from the tower and put on a pike. And I was livid. I was like, oh my God, these guys are going to pay. And I never saw the end of my rage, you know? And Vlad the Impaler went on this crazy death cult, expedition for the rest of his life. And eventually he was overthrown by a coup of his own men, killed by his own guard in his backyard in the swamps in, what was it, 1476. He died.
76, yeah.
Yeah. Having been born in 1431, they think. So
1431.
Yeah, 1431.
So he was pretty young, huh? Not an old vampire. Like, that's the thing. Vampires are supposed to be hundreds of years old, or at least reaching up
45.
to that century. A true in our version of the folklore, I guess.
Well, so yeah, in the book that I was listening to on Audible, The Case Files of Vampirism, they mentioned that Vlad the Impaler was not an actual vampire. And in this article that I found also, it says it's a popular misconception that Vlad Tepes is the historical Dracula. Vlad's sole connection to the fictional character is in his name. He was often called Dracula. His father, Vlad II, was known as Dracul or Devil. Dracula means son of Dracul or son of the devil. Vlad committed his many atrocities against his enemies and subjects alike. But Vlad has no association with folkloric vampirism. Modern accounts say he drank the blood of his enemies on at least one occasion, but no evidence exists to support this. Even so, such a practice in warfare symbolizes the total conquering and absorption of the enemy and has no connection to vampires. Usually in the vampiric lore, they don't really become vampires till after death anyway.
Yeah, true. But another thing was he was known to eat and drink amongst, corpses strewn about. He kind of didn't even faze him. He didn't, we didn't make him lose his appetite. And he would behead people, put them on pikes, and eat and drink like right then and there. Amongst the corpses.
He was also from Wallachia, a province south of Transylvania, and now part of Romania. Yeah. So he wasn't actually Transylvanian; he was Wallachian. But the Bram Stoker's Dracula kind of based that Dracula on Vlad, and then the Transylvania thing kind of stuck a little more. And the romancing of the vampire because of the sexual tension in the late 1800s, early 1900s of women not being able to express themselves sexually because of the Catholic Inquisition or whatever you want to call it. Their sexuality was pretty deprived, so they would read these fictional books like this to help kind of get out their sexual feelings. That's why you see a lot of the vampirism or vampire movies now, like Twilight and stuff, is very romanticized. Yeah.
Romanticized.
I like Vampire Hunter D.
Romanticized. Yeah, Vampire Hunter D. Yep.
Yeah, they explore the Dracul story and that. And they associate it with
anime.
Wallachia, however it's pronounced.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I want to ask Mark what your gnosis is on any teeth sinking vampiric stories, sir.
Well, I'm here
Even
to
psychic
learn.
vampires work too. You know any psychic vampires?
No, I'm here to
Yeah.
learn. I'm not sure. I'm familiar with some of these stories. I like that clarification Dan just shared with the vampires becoming vampires after death. Typically, it's somebody who lived like a sinful lifestyle, so to speak, right? But it's interesting. This may or may not be related. There's a Welsh folk practice of these people called sin eaters. So a village would have a sin eater who, upon someone's death,
Senator.
they would they would leave a like a cake on top of the deceased person's body, and then this sin eater would come along a few days later and eat the cake, right? The cake is supposed to absorb the sins of the deceased person. And eating everyone's sins, you're sort of an outcast, you're sort of on the fringes. And people who fulfilled this role as these pagan cultures became more Christianized, they
Mm-hmm.
would be pushed off to the fringes, and that's where a lot of these stories of like weird strange people in the woods come from, in my opinion. This sin eater could have been, in some cultures, a beneficent being, somebody who's helping in some way.
Mhm.
Although maybe because they're helping, they're sort of sacrificing their, standing with the community. They're fulfilling like an occult role, which now that we don't have that, what's happening on an occult level? I don't know. Maybe this leaves room for sicknesses of an occult nature, because we don't have people fulfilling that role of the sin eater, or maybe even the vampire, if there's a proper role for a vampire. I tend to think of vampires as like parasites, right? Coming in and absorbing the life force of another person. That's what I think of when I think of vampire.
Yeah, you're a little late coming in, but I had mentioned that a lot of times they were scapegoats for unknown medical problems. They were not properly burying or embalming bodies at that time, and they're only putting them in like a meter to a meter and a half of dirt, so like 3 feet to 4.5 feet. And so they were still hearing their grumblings and whatnot, and so they thought by burying and digging them up, stabbing them in the heart with a stake would in turn kill the vampire. And then if they got blood all over them, then they're like, oh, then the hysteria was that they were going to become a vampire or some shit. And so when the bodies would get bloated and full of blood after it was starting its decomposition phase, and so they thought that only the person was not a vampire if the bones were all clear of meat and it was just bones left, then they weren't a vampire. But if the body was still in the tomb or in the grave, then if it was full of blood or still had flesh on it, that they were eating away at their own flesh, so they're a vampire, or that they were drinking blood because they were full of blood still when they stabbed them in the heart. So it's a lot of just mispractice with medical burial and stuff like that.
Yeah, sometimes they would do other things like put a nail through their head or through their ankles, and they would put a rock or a pottery shard in their mouth,
so they couldn't bite.
Yeah. they would put a brick on their face, on their mouth, or they would put a giant rock or boulder on their body before they buried them, so that they couldn't get up and move and go on bodies.
It's funny in True Blood, that show True Blood, some of the vampiric folklore they have in that strewn throughout that story is that if you bury a vampire in soil, it actually heals them. So like if you put them in the coffin, it protects them from like the soil in a box, and it doesn't heal them. But what they'll do is they'll dig themselves a hole to heal themselves, and they'll hide if they're like out in the day and they're like, oh fuck, the sun's coming up, they would dig a hole and then they would heal themselves from the soil. So you know, which is interesting because it's like it's almost like there's like an initiatory level to get up to the point of actually being a true vampire, right? Just kind of like the alchemist story of like the philosopher's stone, or on that voyage and that journey. But I think truly on an occult level, an esoteric level, that we might actually be cross correlating some of the same things, because in some associations the vampire itself is a high magic being, right? They have magical
a witch
properties,
or a warlock,
and they're a witch or a wizard, right? So I was thinking, I was like, okay, you know, we've been I've been a part of the Cult Book Club and stuff, where we went deep on the werewolf symbolism, and then you know, kind of got tied into the Jeffrey Dahmer thing, so on and so forth. But I kind of came to this realization that werewolves themselves, I think, are summoned from like necromantic or higher echelons of magical beings that are potentially the vampires that are in the shadows. So you know, what we might be considered, to bring it into modernity of what we're experiencing now, of who pulls the puppet strings of reality at this moment, I think what we consider to be elite, you know, what some people call reptilians, might actually be closer to a royal bloodline, families that are using ancient occult practices that we could be considered something along the lines of vampirism, that are running the strings today. And you know, and then you can go like stranger and deeper into like saying, you know, why human trafficking is happening and what's happening to the bodies there, going into looking into the history of medical cannibalism and the use of body parts throughout the really sticky history of how we were fixing people, the ancient history of blood transfusions themselves, the occult properties of the bones of a deceased person, or eating the brain to acquire that knowledge, using the blood for different medical practices.
Soul transfer.
So, right? So these vampire stories are not that far-fetched when you kind of put into account other historic uses of these things. And then, you know, so yeah, I just want to say that I really do think that there's a bigger thread to be pulled here when trying to look at the history of vampirism and that concept in folklore.
Yeah, the reptilian thing, that goes back to the Nagas of ancient Hindu beliefs, that the dragon people or the snake people from the inner earth were blood drinkers, and they were considered to be reptilians. So it goes as far back as that. And in the Orphic Rite, where the dark cabal sacrifices children and babies and drinks their blood, that's been going on since the times of ancient Greece, and maybe further back than that. But that continues today, and it's called the Orphic Rite, named after Orpheus for some reason. But it ties back to the Bacchic myth and the Mithraic myths.
So I have a couple things. In reading the book, the case studies, the vampire case studies, they said that the werewolf symbolism happened because they would often use dogs to go help them pull these bodies out of the grave. And sometimes the dog would tear off a limb or whatnot of the vampire, and then that would kind of get transfused into this werewolf type symbolism. So in a lot of ways, some of it can be somewhat explainable. I think after, you know, sort of like the vampire stuff in the 1800s kind of wore off, definitely a legend happened and a mythology happened. And I think some people still try to use some of that mythology. I even believe that some of the pagans of the time used that mythology as in they would shave down their canine teeth to make them look more like vampire teeth, just to scare away the other people, because they would think that they're like immune to death, and so they would kind of have that fear type attribute associated with them, to help them get away with murder, things of that nature. And I have another story that kind of takes us back also more into Egypt. And it says the vampire story is tough to pinpoint. The image of the seductive night walkers we think of today was majorly shaped by pop culture dating back to the 1800s, but seeds of the modern concept have appeared in mythology since the beginning of recorded history. The story of Sekhmet, the Egyptian feline warrior goddess, associated with both plague and healing, is considered by some to be one of the oldest vampire tales. Legend holds that the sun god Ra sent his daughter Sekhmet down to punish humankind for their disobedience. But after Sekhmet couldn't stop drinking blood amid her slaughter, Ra quailed her planet-draining thirst by dyeing a bunch of beer red. Basically, she guzzled it all and slept for 3 days. It says Lilith, a 400,000-year-old figure in Jewish folklore, who in some stories was Adam's wife before Eve, had a monstrous rep in ancient Babylonia. Her name derives from a Sumerian word for female demons or wind spirits, Lilitu. According to scholar J.A. Skurlock via the Jewish Women's Archive, the Babylonians believed the Lilitu were hungry for victims because they had once been human and slipped through the windows into people's houses looking for victims to take the place of husbands and wives whom they themselves never had. Well, the image of Lilith as a deadly, hungry temptress has endured for centuries. Lilith was the first vampire in True Blood, the TV show, for example. A subsection of self-identified feminists have embraced her as the first misunderstood, feisty lady, inspiring the Jewish American magazine of the same name. Many cultures have some equivalent of a life-draining creature. In the Philippines, for example, there's the Manananggal, who some believe can shapeshift into a woman and sucks blood from bellies of pregnant women. So there's a little bit more ancient history into vampires.
Yeah. It was interesting what you were saying about the tie-ins with the werewolf. I know the Greek name for werewolf, Vrikolakis, comes from the Bulgarian name Vrikolak. And those can be, they're flesh-eating creatures, but sometimes they're interpreted as a werewolf. Sometimes they're interpreted as a vampire. A lot of times there were signs that people would be vampires as having a third or fourth nipple or having hairy body hair, a hairy chest. It's associated as being tied in a predisposition to being a vampire.
I want to say hello to our buddy Gabe here, joined in. What's happening with you, Gabe?
Greetings, brethren. Looks like my connection here is a little choppy. I might switch to phone here in a minute, but I thought I'd offer up some of the lovely fruits that we gathered up from previous weaves. You know, we did a show on H.P. Lovecraft, and we discovered in his bio that he had overbearing, overprotective matriarchs. His mother and his aunts were sheltered him way too much, and this is a characteristic of royal bloodlines, particularly over the Alexandrian bloodline over in Russia. In the reason for it, in that we know of publicly, we are aware that these royal bloodlines, they're protected because they have hemophilia, and hemophilia literally translates to blood lover. Hemo is blood, philia is lover. And so this mythology of the reputation of the patriarchal bloodlines being vampires and bloodsuckers, it's very fascinating that we still use that term. We haven't found a better word for that. We still use hemophilia to describe this thinning of the bloodline that eventually they become so sheltered and so coddled. And it's because if they get cut a little bit, they'll bleed out. But H.P. Lovecraft had all the signs and symbols that might have been an aspect of his life. And so when you look at his images, his likeness, it looks like he's actually hiding vampire teeth in his mouth. You can go on Wikipedia, the most popular H.P. Lovecraft image. He looks like he's hiding his little vamp mouth. But then we've taken H.P. Lovecraft and we've put him right next to Zuckerberg. And it looks like Zuckerberg might very well be a descendant of H.P. Lovecraft. And this is super trippy because the word Zuckerberg translates to a million nefarious potential things. And one of the many things you can garner out of translating Zuckerberg is sucker of the sheepskin. So Zuckerberg is chupacabra.
He looks like he's never seen the light of day. He's so damn pale.
It fits, doesn't it fit? It's like we have to read. We have to kind of read into what we're seeing a little bit. It's not in the public. It's implied. It's not explicit. And Zuckerberg's name kind of confirms all of our suspicions in a very major way.
I mean, and then his connection to, higher secret societies and being able to just plunge right into this new movement of social media at the perfect time, and implement. I really do think so. I think Elon Musk, when you start to look at his family line as well, I really do think these bloodlines that we speak of are coming from straight up what we consider to be vampires. And just to touch on the serpentine bloodline from earlier, and like Dracula, the family of dragon, right? Like dragon and serpent are 100% connected. That ties back to a feathered serpent, which has all of its symbolism. So when you have the cross correlation between, the shadowy serpent archetype and then mix it in with the vampire folklore, I think we find ourselves still within the midst of this. And that's that spiritual battle that everybody's talking about, because there's people that need sustenance that non-vampiric energies need, right? Like we survive off of beautiful plants and, sometimes occasionally, of course, the animals and things like that. But then there's things that feed off of our energy as well.
I got one more thing on the Mark Zuckerberg thing. Like, while we're looking at it through this light, you got to take it a little further. The word Marcus, the kiss mark of the sheep sucker. It's also Zuckerberg also means a burg is a city, so he feeds off of the city folk. And we know that he's trying to build smart cities and herd people into his techno prisons, his techno gulags, where he can get to them easily, shut down this camera and steal away the stray sheep while no one's looking. It's pretty nefarious when you look at it in that light.
Yeah. Marcus was one of the prominent vampire figures in that movie. Was it with Kate Beckinsale? What was the name of that vampire series with Kate Beckinsale? Is that Underworld?
Yeah, Underworld with the vampire lycanthrope battle, which is epic.
Marcus was one of the top dogs.
So good.
Yeah, that's a great one.
That's a good
I know
point.
you mentioned Elon Musk possibly being in the vampire lineage, and I know that in Africa there's legends of vampires from old times. The Obeifo or the Asanan, known by the Ashanti tribe of Ghana for being blood-drinking witches who will leave their own body at night and travel as a glowing light to drink child blood.
Oh, what's funny about that? The dead man's moth, which is like the Silence of the Lamb cover moth. It's a hawk. It's a variety of hawk moth. Some of the folklore ties into moths and butterflies. Like if you see a moth or a butterfly, as well as bats, obviously, but that's something that the vampire spirit can go into that body. So the heavy folklore behind that, but I think the origins of that dead man's moth is from Northern Africa, if I'm not mistaken, around that region geographically, so that's interesting, because also look at where Elon Musk's family comes from, right? Like they're originally from Canada. His grandfather was from Canada, but then they left to do worldly travels and then found themselves owning mineral mines in South Africa. That's exactly where Mae Musk was, situated with her husband. And so both Elon Musk parents come from South Africa, from different mining families. And, mines, interesting. What lives inside the mines? Who fucking knows? Inside the mines of the mines, man. Like, that's where the serpent energy flows, right? So, and also where all the money comes from. I mean, I think if people want to learn a lot about, the current power structure, like look into the mining, like look at where mining is happening, look at ancient mining families, right? Because it just correlates the same as oil baron families and oil money as well, because the Musk were buddies with the Rockefellers. It says that during his travels, the story of the grandfather of Elon Musk is actually pretty prominent. They have a lot of information on him, and people know that I've listened to Rising from the Ashes for a while. That's my fucking arch nemesis, so I got the juice on Musk, but he got kicked out of Canada for being a part of the technocratic movement in the earliest of the 20th century. And through his worldly travels, he became good friends with the Rockefellers, apparently. And then look at what's happening now with Tesla Motors and all of the lithium ion and all of the mining that they're getting, and where are they getting all these minerals from, the ancient mining connections and shit. So, yeah, man, shit goes deep, brother.
I wanted to confirm with you real quick, homie. Isn't Rockefeller translate to barley stone? Wasn't that you?
I didn't ever make that. No, I don't.
I think the name Rockefeller translates to barley stone, which is that's where the ergot and LSD ties into, and also the barley stone is a cog that churns the grain, and we know about continuation of government, the COG,
Illuminati confirmed.
Continuation of the covenant.
That's hilarious. You know what's funny about the name Barley Stone is, back when I was living in Hawaii, I was working at this Italian restaurant, and this really eccentric guy that I was working with, he wanted to make music, and I was like, yeah, man, let's start a band. He's like, man, if we start a band, we got to name it Barley Stone. And I was like, I like that fucking name. That is a tight name. And I've stole it from him 13 years ago. But that's super fascinating, because if that is so, which I don't see the turning of the grains, also yet again the agricultural family lines that run the ag companies is another huge money connection in history. But my name Roman, also like the name Roman, like one's from Rome, right? The Romans. Also, in every gematria cipher equals out to gator, the word gator. And so I've been trying to find that connection. Like, where does the alligator and the crocodile kind of fall into this? Well, you can maybe kind of speculate that they are reptiles. They're part of the reptile family. When you look at old alchemical paintings, you see alligators hung in alchemist lab. And I remember we've talked about this on different weaves and streams and stuff. Like, what are the alligators doing in the alchemist lab, right? Like, why are they hung there? What's the significance besides, they're incredible, fascinating creatures, like to do projects and experiments on? Well, we know that in different practices, especially in antiquity, that the use of different animal blood would be used, and in magical and occult practices. So I think that there is a bigger connection to the alligator and the alligator than I've heard. I haven't found anything too much on it. This is just complete speculation over, different areas of research over time. But I think it would be interesting because, the Romulus and Remus stories, of suckling on the teat of a wolf, having that almost like lycanthropic connection, that werewolf connection, their kind of cannibal connection. And then they started Rome, so they are the Romans, and there's like the gator. So like if there's blood, so here's what I'm alluding to, right? There's the mythos and the folklore of vampires having special blood. There's something about their blood that is different, that keeps them alive after death, because it's partly sacrificing other people's blood to put into their body. But there's, they can't mix with silver. There's different like strange things. And I think because they are part of necromancy. And when you look at the rise of vampire stories, also in the rise of Renaissance period and Renaissance magic specifically, one of the 7 Renaissance magics is necromancy. It's one of the most popular ones. And so raising people from the dead, being a high echelon wizard, right, of sorts or what have you. I think there's a connection there. I think there's and the necromancers of the Renaissance.
There's definitely a connection there. I know that silver was one of the first antibiotics, and it was known to clear disease. So I think in part of the mythology, they associated silver as purifying, and it would purify.
Colloidal.
Like if a vampire, someone that was cursed, would take silver, it would destroy them because you would try to purify them. But they were like the unpurifiables. But there's definitely a connection with the crocodile and the underworld and the afterlife in alchemy and Egyptian lore. Sobek, the crocodile god, would devour the souls of those who committed one of the 42 transgressions of Ma'at after their heart was weighed against a feather and it weighed more than a feather. What would happen would be they would be devoured by the crocodile before they were reborn and reincarnated again. That's the legend of Sobek.
Yeah.
Super symbolic then to have it in your lab while you're doing when you're looking for the Philosopher's Stone or the elixir of life.
Yeah, overcoming those karmic battles.
Being
reborn.
Super fascinating. Well, let me share with you guys here. We'll just go over an article. It's a pretty relatively exoteric article, I suppose, but it's about Croatia and a famous vampire in Croatia.
Cool.
So let's do that. Let's see. In Croatia's northernmost state of Istria, folklore and myths run rampant with the rich history of witches, vampires, giants, and energy lines. Ask any Croatian what their favorite place in their country is, and it's likely that they'll launch into a cascading praise for the northernmost state of the nation, Istria. Lesser trodden by international tourists, but big in the hearts and imaginations of the locals, inland Istria is flush with medieval hillside hamlets with cobbled streets in like Motivun, Grosjean, Optalj, Pajin, Pekan, and Kringa. I've never said Croatian names before. Those are really fun. The overarchingly pretty villages have more going on than meets the eye. First off, Istria has a wildly layered history, as the region has changed hands between rulers, countries, and cultures of myriads of time. Celts and ancient Illyrians. Do you guys know this one? What is this? Illyrians.
Illyrians.
Illyrians. Thank you. So Celts, ancient Illyrians, Romans, Slavs, Venetians, and the Austro-Hungarian Habsburgs. Whoa! The fucking Habsburgs all called this place home at one time or another, each leaving their mark. But more than that, Croatians know Istria for its rich folklore, myths, and spirituality. Ancient Slavic gods, prehistoric monuments, energy lines, giants, witches, and vampires are just some of the stories you're likely to come across while taking your time to explore the Istrian highlands. While on the surface, these villages look as though they were established in the medieval Venetian era, many have a history that extends back to at least 2,000 years, as one civilization after another took over the ancient hill for fort settlements. We'll scroll down to the vampire section. It's a pretty good article, actually, for being incredibly loaded with ads. You gotta love it. Actually, I have a friend who's going to Croatia soon, so I thought this was also pretty cool. Here we are. Oh, just right past this one. Hold up. Here we are. Okay. To add to the heady mix of ancient gods, stone circles, ley lines, and giants, the most notorious influential character of Istrian folklore is the vampire Juri Grando, who originated in the village of Kringa and almost certainly inspired Bram Stoker. Grando died in 1656, but terrorized Kringa for 16 years after his death, knocking on people's doors that night and causing the death of many residents. In 1672, a party of 9 locals from Kringa formed a hunt to end his habits. They dug up and found his body in its coffin, perfectly preserved and smiling. So they cut off his head and reburied him. Et voila, no more strange deaths in Kringa. Slovenian writer Johann Weikard von Valvasor wrote about Grando's life and the afterlife of a historical epic, The Glory of the Duchy e Carniola. After visiting Kringa during his travels, his book, originally published in German in 1689, is full of eyewitness accounts. You can visit the commemorative stone plate in the village of Kringa with the names of all 9 participants in the vampire's elimination. Grando is the first character in history to be identified as a vampire and not, as you might think and hear in these parts, a string gun. A string gun, or a stringa, if female, is another Istrian creature, distinct from vampires, as they are always tied to a living person and also distinct from witches, despite their tendency to congregate on hills and mountaintops. The string gun possesses its host by night, and by day, the chosen host body is unaware of when the person sleeps. The string gun possesses the person's body to kill animals and children. Depending on their strength, researchers from the University of Zagreb are currently collecting string gun stories and documenting this oral history in depth. Like any rich land and oral history, your best bet is to go to Istria's villages and talk to local guides, experts, or longtime residents. There are undoubtedly more stories to uncover. So, just another famous story in an area of a supposed vampire that was killing local people and using their blood for its own purposes.
So that word string gun sounds like a regional derivative of Estregas. The Estregas were, Etruscan witches, and they venerated Minerva, the owl.
Oh.
And I always think about the word strategic maneuver is encapsulated, and the owl can turn its head, all in a full circle. It can see in all directions. That's a very strategic maneuver to be aware of your surroundings anatomically. So I think in very interesting ways, we still keep these words alive, and particularly in the military. The military is saturated with deep esoteric terminology that is well preserved.
Yes.
I also had that article, and it says the word stringin or stringon is Venetian, which is commonly spoken in Istria, is properly a sorcerer. So,
I think there's a lot of variations on that name. Apparently, it originates from the Greek strix, and it can be said as striga, strigoi, strigun, strigan, strigoi being Romanian, but from Istra, strigun. And apparently, as you mentioned earlier, they're female demons, but striga is also a plant in Africa known as witchweed. So there's ties in Africa to that. In Latin, it's the striga, the evil spirit. Comes from the folklore of the Friulian, Ligurian, Lombard, and Romanian. And the name means stroke or strike. But in Greek, it comes from the word screecher, like the screech owl, and ties in with the owl. But it can also be known to fly as a bat, moth, bee, or fly.
Okay. Oh, the bee.
Blood transform into a flying insect, and disgusting, well-muscled beasts that can run on all fours, with super strength and speed, extended jaw from ear to ear, 2 rows of teeth inside, long fingers with claws that could tear through bones, and only hunts at night.
Have
There's
you
a lot
guys
of variation.
Have you guys ever heard a screech owl before? Like really lean into the screech? Have you guys heard it?
No.
Yeah.
It's scary.
Blood curdling.
Really?
Oh man, it's traumatizing. I was really young. I was at my grandmother's house out in the country, like deep in the woods, in a place called Devil's Hollow, that is rich with mythology. And so I'm already pre-programmed to know that we got like trolls under bridges and witches on mountaintops and the green-eyed man at a certain ditch if you drive by at the right time. So I already have all these preconceived notions. But then, and I'm alone in the car waiting for my folks to, leave grandma's house. And I'm all alone and I hear my first screech owl ever. I will never forget it. I literally thought there was somebody getting murdered and that I should get out and go help, but I couldn't. I was paralyzed.
Shit.
It froze my soul. I'll never forget it. It was awesome.
Yeah, one of the first vampire accounts comes from the Striga in the 16th century by a guy named Jure Grando, and he ties it in with the owl.
Wait, Grando? No, so that's a homage to that ancient vampire that we just spoke of in Croatia?
Is there a tie-in with Grando? Yeah, it's Jure Grando Ililovic.
That was literally his name, the vampire we just spoke of.
That was one of the first accounts.
Boy,
okay. Yes.
That sure sounds like Elizabeth to me.
Oh, Elizabeth. Okay, so
Elizabeth.
I wanted to maybe wait to get into to Elizabeth Bathory. Yeah, man, because that story is
Bathory.
Fascinating.
Bathory.
And I think maybe we should just go there anyway. So let me share my screen here. And I'll share just the Esoteric account of Wikipedia's story on Bathory. Then we can all touch in on it if people are familiar. With the Blood Countess, she has under her belt, she is 650 victims that she has murdered and used their body parts for different things. So this is just a little bit on the accusations in the investigation of Elizabeth Bathory. Between 1602 and 1604, after rumors of Bathory's atrocities had spread throughout the kingdom, Lutheran minister Istvan Magari made complaints against her, both publicly and at the court in Vienna. In 1610, Matthias II assigned György Thurzo, the Palatine of Hungary, to investigate. Thurzo ordered two notaries, Andras and Moses, to collect evidence in March 1610. By October 1610, they had collected 52 witness statements. By 1611, the number had raised to over 300. Bathory is said to have begun killing daughters of lesser gentry who were sent to a gymnasium. I don't know what that is. Gymnasium was a building or portion of the house reserved for women. Okay. By their parents to learn courtly etiquette. The use of needles was also mentioned by the collaborators in court. There were many suspected forms of torture carried out by Bathory. Some witnesses named relatives who died while working at the gymnasium, and others reported having seen traces of torture on dead bodies, some of which were buried in graveyards and other unmarked locations. So it doesn't go into the depth of crazy stories that is associated with Elizabeth Bathory. Let me just kind of paint you guys a little bit of a picture. She was married at 15 with a young prince, and they were both in some of the richest families in this area of Hungary, which, not to mention, is hilariously what's the word I'm looking for? Ironic, right? Hungary and Hungary. They're very hungry for the blood in Hungary. And so she got married at a very, very young age and was known for her cruelty. And she was known for being cruel to her the people that were around her, taking care of her when she was a child. But later, as she grew up, she brought in a witch, right, as they do in royal houses, right? They'll have alchemists, or they'll have people that are, you know, deep in astrology to create their magic circle. If you're in the higher echelons of money, then you have people around you that have really good skills that are going to basically be your tribe. They're your circle. It's your magic circle. The magic circle of Rudolph II included characters like John Dee and things like that, famously. So what happened was, I think, because it doesn't get into this too much in other stories that I heard, because I did some digging on Elizabeth Bathory and her 650 counts of murder, that it didn't start getting really strange until she brought in this quote unquote witch. And what I think that is that the quote unquote witch was teaching her of these old actual like occult practices of using blood, and how the blood has been used and how it will be used in order to enhance magical gain, right? To use the higher echelons of magic. And so she was really interested in taking her thirst for giving others pain to help her gain higher magical rituals. So Elizabeth Bathory is one of the most famous serial murderers of all time. But the fact that she sewed up the lips of people who thought that they could talk ill to her in her royal house, when she would tighten their hands so hard with cuffs that they turned blue, so in the morning the blood would just squeeze out very easily. She's a fucking vampire. She is a vampire. And her name is Elizabeth. She's a Queen Elizabeth of her own respect. To see the cross correlation between other Queen Elizabeths that have also magical and occult practices tied to them is very alluring, in my opinion.
Yeah, man. It's that Cybele. They all got that Cybele, you know. Queen Isabel, Queen Isabeth, Elizabeth. You know, they all got the Cybele hiding in that name. It's not a good name. Not a name I would be passing around lightheartedly. It does. It kind of strikes fear on a subconscious level. You know, whether you know you see the pattern or not, you see other people respond to the fact that they know the pattern, and eventually it is impressed onto you to be passed on to the next person. It's profound, the power of the name.
I've brought it up before, and still, you know, it's going to be probably a few years until we like get this even more information on it. But the name archetypes, like you're saying, I really do think there's something so prominent that the name archetype fills on our spirit's journey, on our soul journey, on whatever life is, whatever reality is. There's something on some strange energetic or magnetic level that the names fulfill these roles. Like, you know, Dan, okay, brother Dan over here, okay, has found himself digging up ancient history and finding secrets of the tribe of Dan and those secret connections, you know, through his name. And then that name archetype itself led you on that path. I mean, maybe if you had a different name, maybe you would still go on the same path of looking into ancient history and digging up the mysteries. But also, then again, maybe not. You know, Gabriel, what does your name allude to in like biblical senses, right? You kind of pay homage to your name archetype, brother.
It's true. It's quite a set of shoes to fill. I'll tell you that for sure. Freaking cowboy boots, size 13s.
Speaking my language.
You gotta have the Spurs, baby. Dan, you got an article to share, brother?
Yeah, I do, of Bacchus Saint-Germain.
Oh, here we go, my boy.
The infamous Louisiana vampire. Flawless skin that never seems to age, eyes that pierce into your soul, never hungry but always thirsty, powerfully charming yet peculiar, They draw you in with their fascinating stories and hypnotic voices, but you can't help to think something seems a little strange. But you go anyway, down into the depths of their dark, eerie palace where their treasures lie, only to realize that you are their next pawn. You clench all of your muscles as chills run down your spine. Someone's thirsty. As the flash, as they flash their crooked smile and you see teeth sharp as knife, you know you found yourself in the midst of a monster you have only heard about in books. Vampires have long been fascin- fantasized in folklore and mythical tales throughout the ages, as we can't help but be enchanted by their curious creatures. And lucky or unlucky for us, here in Louisiana, vampires are closer to the home than we might think. Through the earliest tales of vampires date back to Greek mythology, New Orleans is home to some of the most prominent vampire myths or perhaps recounts, and is spewing with haunted history. Most prominent is the tale of Comte Saint-Germain, who many believe to be Jacques Saint-Germain, Louisiana's very own vampire. Who is Comte Saint-Germain? Picture this. In the 1700s France, you're invited to a dinner party filled with prestigious guests. You show up to a lavish mansion, and the room is bursting with conversation. A man walks in, almost gliding as if floating on air. He speaks in a way in which you've never heard before. His eyes lock you in. He speaks of events 100 years prior with such detail you could swear he was there. Comte Saint-Germain mysteriously came on the scene in France in the 1700s. Through records suggest he may have been alive long before that, even during the time of Christ. French historian and philosopher Voltaire, King Louis XV, and Italian writer and adventurer Casanova all claim to have known him. Voltaire even said he is a man who knows everything and who never dies. Records show that he was born in 1710 and died in 1784, but many people have claimed to have seen him since then, even as recently as 1970. He was a man with undeniable intelligence and wit. He captivated the elite with his knowledge and charm. He never seemed to age. He is said to have spoken 6 languages, was a brilliant artist, could play the violin effortlessly, and even grew diamonds. Yes, you heard that right. Comte Saint-Germain was an alchemist, and a very accomplished one at that. This means he worked with turning metal into gold, creating beautiful jewels out of small stones, and was in search of the fabled elixir of life that many explain why he is so rich. He even trained other alchemists, including one under Marie Antoinette's rule. At her execution, the alchemist supposedly saw Comte Saint-Germain. This was years after he was believed to have died. He wrote a book discussing his work with alchemy and symbols, but to this day, some parts of it have yet to be decoded. How did he get to Louisiana? He continued to travel all over Europe, throwing magnificent parties. Guests claimed never ate a bite of food, and his elite guests marveled at his stories and were mesmerized by his entertainment. He eventually found himself in Germany, where he lived in a castle for a while as a confidant to a Prince Hesse. He has one strange record of his death, which was written by a priest under the king's orders. He supposedly died in 1784, but many people don't believe this to be true. People continuously claimed to have seen him, and the record of his death is very skim. It is rumored that he did not die and instead traveled to the West in order to promote spiritual fulfillment. His claimed first stop is in New Orleans, Louisiana. Who is Jacques Saint-Germain? New Orleans is considered one of the most haunted cities in the United States by many, and with good reason. Perhaps one of the most infamous, sinister figures claimed to roam the streets is Jacques Saint-Germain. Some 200 years after the death of Comte Saint-Germain, an immigrant from south of France named Jacques Saint-Germain came to New Orleans and moved into a dwelling of the Royal Street. He was claimed to be known for his knowledge, charming wit, and seemingly ageless presence. He spoke of events that happened hundreds of years in the past with great detail. He threw lavish parties with the finest food, entertainment, and most prestigious guests, but never ate a bite of food. Not long after he had taken up residence in New Orleans, things got really creepy really quickly. There's a tale told by many vampire enthusiasts in the Big Easy that one night Jacques had a lady over to his home. He had invited her over to a party with many up-and-comers of the elite in New Orleans. After a while, he had asked her up to the balcony and attempted to bite her neck. She freaked out and was able to distract him long enough to take the only escape she had, right off the balcony onto the pavement below. The story says that she was completely terrified and had drops of blood trickling down her neck. People quickly surrounded her and had the police there in no time. When the police investigated the crime and went into Jacques' home to make sense of the incidents, what they found there made hair on the back of their necks stand up straight. It said that they found clothes from all different time periods stained in blood. There was absolutely no food, not even utensils in the house. There were many bottles of what seemed to be red wine, but were in fact human blood upon further inspection. What they didn't find was Jacques Saint-Germain, who never did return. Legend has it that Jacques was actually Comte Saint-Germain, and people still see a man who looks similar around the world. Have you ever heard of the legend of Jacques Saint-Germain or any other vampire stories? Let us know in the comments.
I got a good vampire story for you guys.
Can I just say with that one? Before you jump into that story, there's a connection to Saint-Germain, a guy named Michel Ney, who allegedly was associated with Napoleon Bonaparte. And he made the link between European Saint-Germain and New Orleans Saint-Germain, because this guy is said to have escaped France and lived out some portion of his life until Napoleon died in North Carolina under the guise of Michel Ney. And you know, if I was really an immortal vampire, then we know that he didn't die in North Carolina. He probably, pretended to die, or his identity died, and he, picked up and turned over a new leaf in New Orleans.
Oh man. Okay. So when my turn comes around, I want to pick up what you just dropped down, Mark. That's so freaking cool. That's so cool. But go ahead, Andy. Go ahead. I'm going to sit on that because it's so cool that this all funnels to New Orleans in a neat way. But I'll wait my turn.
All right, sounds good. We'll go right back to that.
Does it have to do with
I just want
Bacchus?
to tell a story. What were you saying, Dan?
I said, does it have to do with Bacchus?
Oh no, it's not about Bacchus. I don't want to go back that far right now. We're gonna keep it in Louisiana right now with this story. There's a story of a legendary vampire named Auguste de la Grange, who worked along the railroad. They found after finding dismembered, exsanguinated body parts of his victims, over 40 victims that he killed along the railroad. They realized that the path of the victims was following along the tracks of the railroad and began to investigate. Two individuals, a Catholic father named Henry Jonte and a voodoo practitioner named Moses Amashan, began to hunt the vampire or the killer of these dismembered victims, and found and caught up with, hunted and destroyed several minions who confirmed Auguste to be the killer. They ended up finding him inside of a crypt, sleeping during the day, snuck up on him, and he seemed to be weak from not having drank blood for long enough. They snuck up on him and put a stake through his heart. He opened his eyes wide and let out a blood-curdling shriek in his death. And supposedly they put his heart on sale, and it was put up to be bought by auctioneers. And it was a legendary vampire tale that ties back to his heart going up on sale in Louisiana. But it was just graphic how he killed and dismembered all of his victims after drinking their blood. Now we can get back to the Saint-Germain mystery if you want.
Oh man, this is so wild. So my mind was already going to Louisiana, in a major way before I came on with you guys. And this is just so cool that we're all kind of funneling down to,
the French Connection.
Yeah, buddy. Yeah, man.
Yeah,
And
French.
Oh shit.
Yes.
Oh.
And this is where if the Mississippi River, the 7 branches of the Mississippi, if they are, I think of them as the placenta of the country. And they all run off to that delta. They all come down to that delta there in Louisiana, like an offering. That our byproducts and what we give off, it all funnels to this location. And so in my territories work, Louisiana is a very sacred location. So I've done this project where I've taken the zodiac and I've placed it on the Mississippi as though the Mississippi were the solstice line in the 37-degree parallel of the Mason-Dixon. That's your equatorial line where the equinoxes balance. And when you put the zodiac on the United States, then you start plugging in the 22 cards of the major arcana, and all kinds of truths and revelations come out from this project. The state logos, the state seals, the coats of arms, even the animals that they use as their mascots in the sporting teams. It all fits. It's a perfect fit. It's a glorious project. It's something really I'm proud of. But New Orleans is on the first pass with the tarot cards. It is the High Priestess card. And she is sitting in her throne with the Torah in her lap, the story of all the wisdom of the ancients is in her lap. And then when you come around on the second pass with the major arcana, the card beneath her is the Devil card. And it couldn't be a better fit. It blows my mind how perfect these things fit. Into this.
That's a crazy pull. You pull in the HP
States.
and the Devil card. That's
yeah, buddy.
Wow.
You got it. That's and deep. So I've actually corresponded all of the Louisiana Purchase, the entire shape of the Louisiana Purchase. You can pull up a map of what it looks like, and the entire shape of it is. I actually shot you a little copy, homie, in the Telegram group, a little map. And if you can pull it up, it will reveal that the Louisiana Purchase is hiding a Noir Leon. Noir means dark. Leon is the lion. There is a secret lion, and it is encoded embodied in the shape of the map that was initiated with the Louisiana Purchase. Dan. You got it, bro. And the Dan is the feet. The tribe of Dan was the feet of the tribes of Judah.
The feet.
And Louisiana is the foot of the lion. And so when I say that all of our byproducts are washing down to the delta of the Mississippi, they are washing down like an offering at the feet of this gigantic lion on the map of the United States. Wow. And when you see this, I've highlighted the states that embody the shape of a gigantic sphinx. And so at the foot of the sphinx is where the pirate Lafitte made his mark on culture in history and time. So Lafitte of Noir Leon, of the Dark Lion, is still preserved in the shape of the map.
God damn it, Ricky Bobby.
Go to the other one. The other one was
in the lion is actually wearing like a pharaoh's hat. A lot of people pass this around on TikTok. They call him Chef Boyardee. There's like a human form profiled in the Mississippi River, but they didn't see, they stopped with the human form. They didn't see that there's actually the wings of a lion. There's even the legs of the lion behind it.
I see the wings here. Oh, okay. So go to the other one.
And this image actually has my tarot cards, kind of revealing the arrangement of the Tarot Tories cipher. But what's really funny is that the four corners, they're the only exactly perfect right angles. All the other borders of all the other states are either a Y shape or a T shape. They're 3-part segments. The only intersection in all the United States is the 4 corners that is a perfect cross. And it's the butt
Right
of the
here.
lion. It's the cat's ass. Is the
Oh,
4
right here.
corners.
Cat's ass.
The vortex, man. That's his
Cat's ass.
propulsion spot where he gets his levitational powers.
You got
Centrifugal
it.
force.
Yep. And he's wearing like a wajette or some sort of like priestly cap.
Uh-huh.
You know, he's got it up there with Minnesota. So
that means right here, then, where the Kundalini coil or the snake head pops out of the Hajjet hat is right through Wisconsin, Michigan, right here, just pooling in those Great Lakes, all his third eye juice.
Yes.
Minnesota, Iowa, Missouri, Arkansas, and Louisiana.
So what's
if you
popping
take the
off over
initials,
here?
It spells Mimel, and he's got a
right.
10, I see.
That's right. I forgot.
Dick.
That's right. So the heart the heart of the lion is where I put my zodiac.
And carries a big stick.
So the heart of the lion is where I put the zodiac here, and that is the 37-degree latitude. It's a very important marcation globally. Even it goes right through the Strait of Gibraltar. It's 37 is a very a sacred location and number, but that's where the Fort Knox is located. And Fort Knox is where for 4 years they hid the Constitution along with all of the gold, all of the bull lion, all the bull lion. And the Sphinx is technically, you got it. The Sphinx is like a tetramorph. It's like it's a hybrid, multiple animals mixed together.
Morgan says Scorpio. Does it have anything to do with Scorpio?
Well, Scorpio is Florida in my map, which has the tarot cards of the Hanged Man and the Death card. And that makes a lot of sense because a lot of people go there in their twilight years. And a lot of people remember the hanging chads, which the hanging chads are a metaphor for the hangman, the upside down hangman. And the hanging chads were a betrayal that betrayed us. Everybody thought that the election was sealed, and we got a kiss of betrayal when the hanging chads came back and we lost the election, to Al Gore, whose name is correspondent to Al Gore. The chaotic eye of Medusa is Al Gore. So yeah, there's a lot of esoterica hidden in plain sight here. But I just wanted to point out that it's the Noir Lion. It's the dark lion. Well, they actually, when they bought the Louisiana Purchase, I bet a lot of people could answer this quiz question. I probably don't even have to say it. A lot of people probably remember from high school because they drilled it into all of us. The price of the Louisiana Purchase. Do you guys remember?
I think it was free.
It was $15 million, and 15 is the number of the devil card. The devil card is card number 15, and it is stamped and immortalized in history right there at the foot of the Noir Lion. And this is also where the Stamp Act took hold, which was a second generation of the Impression Act. And so we still adhere to a lot of this practice today. We just call it different things. They just switch the language around. So the Impression Act is literally when they impress babies' feet onto the birth certificate, now you're inscripted. And then they had to go through some wars to fight off that process, and they put together the Impression Act, was the second generation of the Stamp Act. And they did it again. They started capturing ships and just pointing out the healthy bodies and saying, you're going to war for us, you're going to war for us, you're too skinny, and you're going to war for us. So they started to impress people into servitude. It's just so profound that it's all forever preserved here in New Orleans at the feet, la feet of the Noir Lion. And this is also where I was thinking a lot about Anne Rice. Anne Rice is the high priestess. I perceive her very much as the high priestess of vampire culture, and she is immortalized in New Orleans.
I have a little
around this area that has just there's something They're very, very much so
I have-
something connected here.
I have some more
uh,
connection to Louisiana.
What you got?
Get it.
I'm going to start with a little history of vampires from this page. It says, according to their idea of legend, it all began in the Mediterranean. The first vampire started out as not a vampire at all, but as a human man named Ambrogio. He was an Italian-born adventurer who fate brought to Delphi in Greece. You can read the full story here, but in a nutshell, a series of blessings and curses transformed this young man into history's first vampire. Specifically, it began with the sun god Apollo, who in a fit of rage cursed Ambrogio so that his skin would burn should it ever touch sunlight. Ambrogio's bad luck followed when he ended up gambling away his soul to Hades, the god of the underworld. The next curse came via Apollo's sister Artemis, the goddess of the moon and hunting, who made it so that Ambrogio's skin would burn if he touched silver. The blessings came soon after, when Artemis, taking pity on the poor young man, gave him the gift of immortality. He would carry his curses, his skin burning by sunlight or silver, but he would live forever in his current form. Not only that, but Artemis also gave him the speed and strength to become a hunter whose skills were second only to her own. Blood-sucking, which, by the way, is called hematophagy, tophagy, Hematophagy.
Yeah,
Hematophagy.
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 Binary vampire. That's a hematophagy.
Is also included in this blessing. In the vampire origin story, Ambrogio hunts swans and uses their blood as ink to write love poems to his lady Selene. While this may be considered a little creepy by our standards, it was all that was that unusual. It wasn't all that unusual in ancient Greece to make do with what you hunted. And then I have this other another reference, and there arose in imperial Rome a revival of the cult of the ancient Greek god Dionysus, the god of wine, known as Bacchus to the Romans. Worshippers would gather 5 nights per month to drink the wine and perform the bacchanal, where sexual inhibitions were discarded. And then this comes from Manly P. Hall. The most powerful stories are a culture's creation story or a legend or belief that answers questions about the universe, such as the origin of the world, mankind and nature, man's place in the world, animals, life and death. The story of Dionysus, representing rebirth in the cycle of life, death, and rebirth, is also a creation story. So remember, Dionysus is associated with Bacchus. After dismembering him, the Titans first boiled the pieces in water and afterwards roasted them. Pallas, Athena, rescued the heart of the murdered god, and by this precaution, Bacchus, Dionysus, was enabled to spring forth again in all his former glory. Jupiter, the Demiurgus, beholding the crime of the Titans, hurled his thunderbolts and slew them, burning their bodies to ashes with heavenly fire. Out of the ashes of the Titans, which also contained a portion of the flesh of Bacchus, whose body they had partly devoured, the human race was created. Thus the mundane life of every man was said to have contained a portion of the Bacchic life. That's from Manly P. Hall. And then if we go back to motherfucking Louisiana, we have the Crew of Bacchus, which is a New Orleans Mardi Gras crew. And the history is the Crew of Bacchus is an organization founded in 1968 by Owen Brennan Jr. as one of the first modern super crews. Defined by their size, spectacular floats, and celebrity riders, it is named Bacchus for the Roman god of wine. Bacchus was the first crew to have celebrities appear as part of the parade. Past celebrities who have served as Bacchus include Steve Gutenberg, Danny Kaye, William Shatner, Lauren Green, Charlton Heston, Jackie Gleason, Bob Hope, New Orleans Pete Fountain, Phil Harris, Henley Winkler, Glenn Campbell, John Lovitz, and more recently Elijah
about that
Wood,
blood.
Sean Astin, Michael Keithan, James Gandolfini, Gerald McRaney. In 1992, Harry McCormick. 1993, Hulk Hogan, Val Kilmer, Drew Brees, Will Ferrell, Jim Caviezel, Jensen Ackles,
Wait, all these fools are in the Bacchus squad?
Yeah. Ron Howard's reign as Bacchus was canceled by the 1979 New Orleans Police Department strike, which scuttled all official Mardi Gras parades within the city limits. His Happy Days co-star Henry Winkler reigned in 1977. The only non-celebrity to reign as Bacchus was Sergeant John McKeel Jr., 1981, who was held captive for 444 days during the Iran hostage crisis with 51 others. The crew of Bacchus parade during New Orleans Mardi Gras on the Sunday evening before Mardi Gras. And basically they have a whole Bacchus festival during Mardi Gras and all these people that I mentioned dressed as Bacchus, and they parade him down on a float down through the streets.
On that point, there's a whole culture of secret societies. They're called Mardi Gras crews, and they evolved out of like the Victorian era South, when becoming a part of like the Freemasons or Rosicrucians or what have you was fashionable, and it became not so fashionable. This was one of the evolutions of those secret societies. Now they're called social organizations, but if you examine, I'm sure someone could go and examine all of the different crews and find, this occult symbolism inlaid within their costumes and the things that they're, doing on their float, and all of the symbols on the float itself, and so on and so forth. But yeah, the crews it's another interesting tie-in, is like all of the occult sailor stuff, right? Because New Orleans is not just like known for being in a bayou, it's also on an international port, right? So there's pirates and sailors and all the magic that comes along with that culture.
Yeah, that's interesting, man. Like I like some of the strange folklore I was finding about the association with the moon and vampires, and it's kind of the opposite of lycanthropy. It's they actually like the new moon because they apparently, some of the folklore is that they eat the moon, like and they cause the eclipses to happen. What does it say here?
Listen to some of the names of these Mardi Gras crews. Okay.
Yeah, get some these fools.
The crew of Endymion, the crew of Bacchus, the crew of Orpheus, the crew of Thoth, the crew of Cleopatra, the crew of Isis, the crew d'Ivoire, mystic crew of Druids, Knights of Babylon, the crew of King Arthur, the crew of Muses, the Knights of Chaos, the intergalactic crew of Chew Bacchus, the crew of Hermes, Le Crew d'Etat. I'm not making these up.
Intergalactic crew of Chewbacca's wins.
If people want to look this up, it's crew spelled Krewe, and the whole list is here. I'll keep going. The crew of Morpheus, the crew of Oak, the crew of Elvis. Yeah, it goes on and on, but there's some definitely occult themes. I mean, the 12th Night Revealers, the Elves of Oberon, the crew of Athenians, the Atlanteans, the Arthurians. So yeah, they definitely
a lot of Ophic vibes in there.
Yeah, man, I got something to weave on that the crew of Chewbacca's.
Okay.
I actually just I'm doing a project right now. First, I started with the Enneagram of the personality matrix, the 9 personality matrix of the Enneagram. And I put all of the Greek pantheon from the story of Typhon, when he came storming across the land and all the gods went running and hiding in Egypt. And they put on costumes because Pan, the patriarch of the agricultural class in Egypt, Pan told them, put on these disguises as animals, and when Typhon comes, you'll be safe. And so I took that story and I put all of the gods of the pantheon in their emotional stations of the Enneagram. And it was a very rewarding project because now I have a psychological matrix of the pantheon that I can now look through and transpose it onto mythology and stories of movies and film. And the first project I've done with this is Star Wars. And it's a very long story, but I'll just give you guys the cliff notes. Chewbacca is a number 2 on the Enneagram personality matrix. And there's a very particular scene that helped me reveal the objective righteousness of putting Chewbacca in the position of the 2. And that is the scene when he's actually putting C-3PO back together, when he's reassembling him. That is the Magi card. In the Magi card, traditionally, the old Rider-Waite, the most common Rider-Waite image of the Magi, he has his table with all of his accoutrements.
Oh, got a wand. Yes.
Yep, he's got a wand, he's got a sword, he's got the pentacles, and he's got a cup, a golden cup. And the golden cup really stands out pronouncedly. And in the scene where Chewbacca is reassembling C-3PO, he's holding the golden chalice. He's holding the head of C-3PO. And that really creeped me out because it's very likely that if I am seeing into the mind of George Ophi Lucas, then Chewbacca is indicating in that scene that the evolution of man from the prime mate, Chewbacca is the first mate of the Millennium Falcon. He's the primate. He is Enkidu. He's Bigfoot. He's the leg and hairy Bigfoot. And he is indicating and insinuating in that scene. Yes, that the head of C-3PO is the Holy Grail. These headhunters. Very interesting that there is a crew of the intergalactic team of Chewbacca that are insinuating that they are into eating their fellow man. That's very interesting. We just hit that note.
Well, think about also drinking the blood of Christ.
Yeah, Elizabeth Bathory, she used to drink the blood and bathe in it afterwards. She was also known to have fed the flesh of her victims to the victims when they were jailed up, making them eat their own flesh. So there's some
she would like saute make them their hind parts in butter, eat their.
Yeah, she would also cover them in honey and leave them out to be devoured by insects.
Oh,
horrendous.
Buttery rump, bro.
So what's interesting is that talking about that a couple slow burns ago, the Homani in ancient Egypt, where they would crystallize a body by engulfing the mouth full of honey, the body cooking from the inside out, or honey, then milk to bathe in, blood to bathe in too, right? So there's all these kind of sacred fluids of, I think, honey and blood. And so what's interesting about blood too is the science projects kids are doing it in their garage. Kidding. You can basically wash your blood and it's like this blew my fucking the ocean wall. For actually, there was a guy who's through ocean water, he was doing transfusions on himself with ocean water. And so I'm thinking honey, I'm thinking milk from the sacred cow, and blood from the virgin, right? Like that's what's happening in the whatever type of ritualistic practices, right? Like the virgin blood or baby blood, or like the more pure blood. Was interesting when looking into the history of cannibalism and stuff is obviously in the brain was a very of eating to or from the other person, or extra energy or what have you, but creating extra fear or having the blood spiked with insulin and everything when you get that final jab. So like hanging people would often do this, and then the blood would be collected by people in the village, oftentimes with cups. They would come with cups to literally get the blood of a hung person. And so it's just it's embedded into our history, and I think that's why we have obsession with these things on mainstream media, and why we watch shows like Dexter, and where we're identifying with the murderer who's obsessed with blood. And because it's been part of our society for so long, like deeply embedded and imbued into it. And I'm looking at history of trying to find the history of vampires and all these things, and wondering when it stopped, right? Because it was happening from places of power for so long, but when did it change? Like, when actually was there ever a pause from the time that they know that people in power were doing these things, and there was so much money that nothing could happen for them to be stopped? But we don't actually ever have a time in history where that stopped being the case.
It's been going on with the Gaul since Abraham.
Exactly. But look at it. We're praising this type of worship by allowing shows like this to be freely streamable to everybody on the planet. To say, what? It's entertainment, right? So on and so forth. But it's literally serial killers and blood and talking about killing other people's families. I do stop watching it, bro. But hey,
stop watching them and stop doing shows about it.
No, listen. I'm just saying
into it. You put your energy into it. If you don't like it, then take your energy out.
Yeah. All right, Dan, I'm gonna take my energy out on whooping your ass. Now come on over here right now.
See how violent you just got? You want my blood already?
Oh, I got rage, baby. Don't even get me started, man. Like, my shit, y'all want to know my story? Let's go into it, son. Your boy's got a little. I'm working through it though, man. Slowly but surely.
I just wanted to bring up
go ahead, Dan.
the membership of the Bacchus. The crew. There's some interesting stuff in here. The 2020 crew included more than 1,600 members, and its parade featured 33 floats, including its signature floats: the Bacchosaurus, a giant dinosaur; the Bacchawalpa, an equally large whale; the Bacchagator, an enormous alligator; and Bacchatality, a 3-float procession made up of restaurateurs.
That's people who own restaurants.
It doesn't. Yeah, it doesn't have an N though. It's RESTAURATEURS.
Restaurateurs. Well, so we're gonna stay on weird New Orleans. This is, definitely a place where a vampire would want to hang out. The first 3. I'm sorry, Dan. I don't want to step on your point. Are you about to say something? Go ahead.
I just had one more thing. The Bacca Amor, a love-themed float, was introduced in 2008 for the 50th anniversary. The crew introduced 2 signature floats, the Bacca Kong family and the Buccaneer. In keeping with tradition, Bacchus beads and doubloons are thrown to revelers from the floats.
How many members did they have?
1,600.
Whoa.
They had 33 different crews, right?
Yeah, and 33
floats.
crews.
Wow.
So the original crews, right? So you have like the OG crews. Their names are less like obvious. Like the ones I named before, those are newer ones. So the original 3 ones are the Mystic Crew of Comus, And Comus, for those who don't know, is the Greek god of festivities. And it's interesting that the Roman Catholic Creole community was sort of behind this one, right? Because we're talking about an ancient Greek god who is the son of Dionysus, right? So Comus is the son of Dionysus. He's a god of festivity and nocturnal dalliances, whatever that means. And then we have the Knights of Momus, which is the second oldest crew. And they're named after Momus, who is also a Greek personage. I don't think he's a god, but he is the personification of satire and mockery, right? So, and he's in the Aesop fables, which is another sort of occult work, right? So, right at the beginning of this festival, the beginning of this idea, let's do these crews, the first two are like, boom, right out of the bat, right out of the gates, super occult. And then the third,
right out the bat, right?
They're the crew of Proteus. And Proteus is the old man of the sea, the ancient sea god, god of rivers. And what are we talking about? Mississippi River, right? And where New Orleans or Lion Noir. I love that. That's very interesting.
Yeah.
Down, Gabe. And then the Rex Parade is the other crew. So these are like the four oldest crews, and they all boom right out of the gates have tremendously
Rex.
Occult.
Yes,
the dinosaur reptilian.
So if we put a Frenchy French twist to the word the crew, we come out with le crew. And you put le at the end of crew, and you get Crowley.
Le Crowley.
Le crew becomes Crowley. And I think that's very interesting because Crowley did that summoning of the Cthulhu the day after the night of Halloween. That 19 years later, monotonic cycle later, H.P. Lovecraft, he immortalized it in his work, The Call of Cthulhu. And he, when he wrote it in fiction, it was a perfect, there's like 5 or 6 corresponding factors of H.P. Lovecraft's Call of Cthulhu that were a perfect emulation of what we now know with 2020 hindsight. Crowley actually did on the exact day that H.P. Lovecraft was fictionalizing in the Call of Cthulhu, in the exact location there in New Orleans. So New Orleans is where Cthulhu was born under a Crowleyan ritual, and H.P. Lovecraft fictionalized it 19 years later.
Wow.
Wild.
This Rex crew, it says, is restricted to elites with European ancestry. That's an interesting thing to note, that the Rex is connected to the elite.
Shit.
Very kind of obvious to us what that might indicate, but to the average person, they just, oh, Rex, king. But why is the king of Europe, whichever one it may be referring to, why are they being honored at an American sort of event, right? This is New Orleans is kind of interestingly less American than some other American places, even though the Battle of New Orleans took place there. It's, you get what I'm saying? Like it has that French influence, it has that international Caribbean influence. So it's a way for the elite of Europe to sneak in.
Yeah, buddy. I did a breakdown on Rex Charles' official cipher. This is the stamp he's going to put on all of his deeds.
Who is Rex Charles? Who is this guy?
King Charles. This is the new king. It's Queen Elizabeth's replacement. His cipher gives him the title of Rex Charles the Third. It's got 3 eyes in the middle of the C. It's got I C. It's got the seeing eye. But the cipher is it's steeped in Poseidon iconography. It's RC is a 93, and there you have your thelemic number. You got your Rosicrucians right in the middle of Crowley's name, Alice R C Owley. Aleister Crowley was rocking the RC in his name, so they're passing that 93 along. And the 93rd element on the periodic table is Neptunium. And Neptunium holds the psi. The psi is the final symbol in the Greek alphabet. It's the foot, it's the base, it's the down low, the underneath. And we're going to see a lot of psi ops, PSI ops coming forward. And almost all of them have his claim stuck in like a flag.
Man, this occult stuff goes way back. According to the testimony of a speaker that calls himself Neo in the What on Earth is Happening show, the Orphic rite of the occults goes back to the Atlantean warlocks. He actually gives a couple books where some of the Amalekian Satanists list the history of the Atlantean warlocks and some more of the story that has not been revealed to the public. But it goes further back than we think, I think.
Yeah, man. Drop some more of that Amalekian warlock stuff, because that blew my mind. You dropped that on me last time. I still haven't got into it. That sounds wildly obscure.
Yeah, check out episode number 17 on the whatonearthishappening.com show podcast. Unreal, man. But yeah, the Amalekian warlocks, it gets tied in with Moloch the owl, which comes from the Auroch, the great bull, originally, and then was transformed later from the bull, like Baal, to Moloch, like the Bohemian Grove Moloch owl. But those Satanists, they claim to have executed and assassinated JFK.
Oh, fuck. Hold on. I got to say this. So in philology, you can interchange R's and L's. So Amalekian, if you flip the L to an R, you get American.
Whoa.
That's
heavy.
A trip. That's a trip. Just saying. Go ahead. Sorry.
No, that's heavy, man.
What was the word though that you flipped? I didn't catch that part.
Amalekian.
Yes.
American.
In the L in philology, L's can be easily, and they always are, switched to R's culturally. It's easy. It's one of the basics, most basic of philology.
That blew my mind. Yeah, but I was listening to Alvin Boyne Kuhn, and he brought that up, and I was like, oh shit.
Yeah, a lot of the presidents were in
Go ahead,
the Freemasonry secret society that ties back to the Illuminati. The Illuminati were outlawed in Bavaria for a little while, and so they became more secretive and then infiltrated all other secret societies. And so they tie in with the Knights of Columbus, the Italians, the Skull and Bone Society, which I believe is out of Yale. But a whole bunch of other secret societies are all infiltrated by the Illuminati that all tie back to Amaleki and Satanism. And is represented in heraldry and vexillology as the headless knight, which we've mentioned before is just an armor head of a knight with no body. And that refers to unseen powers that are behind a nation. Usually tied back to Venice being the secret center of the Black Pope of the Vatican.
That I was wondering if you, Gabe, if you have superimposed Europe or like America onto the other continent, because I was wondering if if that were the case, like somewhere up where like Italy is, it seems like that would be where New Orleans could be kind of placed in that area. You know,
that's interesting. I dig that a lot. So I have you mean the territories cipher onto the world map or the European map?
Yes.
I have done that. Yeah, I have done that.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, I've done that, and you're right. Italy, when you take the territories and you put it on the world map or just the European map, Italy is very correspondent with the Fool card, which is very interesting because the Fool in most decks, he's about to step off the cliff, so he has the 1 foot going on the hero's journey. He's about to skywalk. He's about to become Skywalker. and it's very appropriate that Italy would be placed in the place of the Fool card.
The Fool card.
Yes, yeah. Because I was kind of thinking like when Indy was talking about like things tying back to almost where the Vatican is located, like having the secret vault there, of all this, the ancient knowledge supposedly, one of these great libraries. I don't know. I was just kind of like getting this. I've always had a vision of like being able to take North America and put it basically right where the Mediterranean is and like superimpose it almost. And because, there's a lot of talk of like, Egypt being in America and like, or the stories of Egypt being in America and being a worldwide, so on and so forth. Anyways, getting a little off track, honestly, from the vampires in general. But these are some pretty speculative thoughts thrown out here. I want to say, wrapping up on the 2 hours mark here, and any final thoughts on the like on you guys' vampire history research, or any interesting characters that you guys wanted to bring
I got
up before we
something
close
huge.
out?
This is gonna blow your minds. I'm so surprised that we haven't come over this yet. In my research, this one was the thing that brought it all together. We explain everything in this article. It ties in
Here we
the
go.
cross, the mirror, not being able to see your reflection, the fangs, the blood drinking, the aversion to garlic. It's all going to be tied in on this. Now, there is a disease called the vampire disease that was discovered around the turn of the 20th century, and it is called porphyria. Porphyria is a blood disorder that causes the body to produce less heme, which is a critical component of hemoglobin, which carries iron in the blood. It causes an extreme sensitivity to light, leading to blackened skin and hair growth problems, which will cause facial disfigurement and make people look extremely old. So they tend to avoid the sun to avoid those issues. But they also have problems that if they don't get enough heme from being prescribed blood by physicians, facial disfigurement results from a lack of oxygen to their facial tissues, and they can become grotesque looking. And so because of this, they were considered vampires and hunted by the Catholics and burned at the stake, which is why they were scared of the cross and averted to Christianity. They also developed fangs because their gums would recede, exposing their teeth, making them look like fangs. Their urine was dark red from porphyria, and the folklore surmised that they were drinking blood due to this fact. And as I mentioned earlier, the physicians would recommend that the patients drink blood, and they would prescribe them to drink animal blood. And since they couldn't go out during the day, they would go out in the night seeking blood, sometimes in very sneaky ways. And that would compensate the defect in the red blood cells. They had an aversion to garlic as well, because the sulfur content in the garlic could lead to an attack, which would cause acute pain. And so that explains why they were averted to garlic. The reflections in their mirror, due to poor oxygenation and destruction of facial tissues, the collapse of facial structures, led the patients to avoid mirrors at all costs, because they did not want to see their grotesque look after facial disfigurement.
Damn, that puts all the bills. That fills all the boxes.
Yeah.
What's the name of this disease again?
Porphyria.
Porphyria.
And it even has like for fear. Port is for, and then furia, which makes me think of like the word the letters FBI is like invoking phobia. FBI is phobia. We whisper threats in very cunning ways with language. That's pretty profound.
And that was established in the year 1911. Now, 8 years later, Bram Stoker wrote his novel, bringing in all these different aspects to the vampire legend.
Nice. So I can drop a few things, a few hanging chads. We can stick some stakes and some hanging chad hearts here.
Yeah.
This is something I picked up from E. Michael Jones, who is a pretty controversial individual, but it's a very valuable theory. And I'm not sure where he picked it up from, but he's where I got it from. He explains many of the monsters of culture in a really fascinating way. And the idea is that, and we can start maybe with vampires. They were born from the failures of scientific advancements. And so, and you guys, I think, probably started on this before I got in here on the weave, but like the idea of vaccinations and injections and needles as a curative device, it had an inevitable byproduct from all of the failures and all the times that kind of science, air quotes, has gone wrong. And so vampires are born out of a very natural human response to people doing experimentation and not always succeeding. So a lot of those doctors will, laud themselves with their successes, but meanwhile, there's a stack of bodies behind them. There's a saying in science that science progresses one body at a time, one funeral at a time. And so you take that maxim and you hold on to it as you go through scientific advancements, and you get the Egyptology becoming a craze in the collective. Well, that is where mummies were born out of. In the Curse of the Mummy, it came to life as the collective's fascination grew with more momentum and energy. And then another really good one is Frankenstein. That Frankenstein was born out of, it was born out of the age when cadaver and cadaver research, where they would do where they chop up bodies for study, autopsies, where they would open theaters. They would actually take doctors, aspiring doctors and physicians would pay to come to a theater. They called it a theater. It was like entertainment for them. And they would pile up in the bleachers and look down on the medical theater while they would cut open these cadavers. Well, that process, that theatrical event, became wildly popular and spread like wildfire. And the byproduct of that is Frankenstein. They collect all of the resentment and fear, and the story is like an amalgamation, a brain homunculus of the collective that became Mary Shelley's Frankenstein story. And just an interesting side note, and this is from E. Michael Jones, give thanks. He says that when Mary Shelley, when she wrote that story, she was actually reading the writings of Marquis de Sade, the godfather of sadism and sadomasochism. She was reading his writings on a literary holiday, having a love affair with some actually well-known fella. I don't remember that detail, but she's having a love affair reading Marquis de Sade, which is a really sick erotica, super sick. And then while she's on that holiday, she composes the story of Frankenstein. And so Frankenstein even has this really twisted residue from its creator, Mary Shelley. So I just thought I would share all of that these monsters do come from really dark places.
I have some connective tissue there, Gabe, and that is Lord Byron, George Gordon Byron, 6th Baron Byron, simply known as Lord Byron, was an English poet. He was a British romantic poet and satiricist, which I think Mark brought up earlier, that one god was a satiricist. So whose poetry and personality captured the imagination of Europe, although made famous by the autobiographical poem Childe Harold's Pilgrimage and his many love affairs. He is perhaps known better today for his satiric realism of Don Juan. So Morgan would not let me would be mad at me if I didn't bring this up. And then there was a book called The Vampire, Pyre. It's a short work of fiction written in 1819 by John William Polidori, taken from the story Lord Byron told as part of a contest among Polidori. Mary Shelley, Lord Byron, and Percy Shelley. The same contest produced the novel Frankenstein or the modern Prometheus. The vampire is often viewed as the progenitor of the romantic vampire genre of fantasy fiction. The work is described by Christopher Frayling as the first story successfully to fuse the disparate disparate elements of vampirism into the coherent literary gene. And she also Morgan also told me that Lord Byron was the first to drink blood from a skull.
Trippy. That is trippy.
And there's another thing here if I can find it. It's let me see. Lord Byron was exiled for proliferating accusations of cruelty, adultery, and Byron's incest with his half-sister Augusta have been taken as explanation enough, although incest was punishable by the ecclesiastical courts, but not a criminal offense. And then there's another
ecclesiastical.
There you go. Sorry, I knew somebody would correct.
We're learning. We're all learning together, Dan. That's all right.
There is also, it says, why is Byron not allowed on gravestones? Stephen Ear, QC Chancellor for the diocese and the judge for the court, said that the verse was beautiful but not appropriate on a memorial in churchyard and cannot be permitted because of its failure to convey a message consistent with the purpose of the churchyard.
Whoa.
So you're not allowed to have any what's it called? I forget the name. But you're not allowed to have any sentences or liturgy from Lord Byron on a grave.
That is profound.
On a gravestone.
Inscriptions.
Inscriptions. Like what's it called when you take a sentence, a quote? You're not allowed to have any quotes from Lord Byron on gravestones.
Wow. I wonder if there's a list of other forbidden characters.
I know. That would be interesting to find out. I did watch this other story about vampires, and it said that sometimes the gravestones were, instead of sitting upright, they were sitting kind of angled out, so that way people would know that that was the gravestone of a vampire.
Oh, trippy.
Or once thought of as a vampire. Yeah.
So one thing that very quick, when you mentioned Prometheus, I'm glad you said that. Gordy mentioned that Frankenstein was originally called like the monster of Prometheus, and because that was a component of Frankenstein in that time. Also, was electricity. The fear of electricity was fused in with that autopsy culture and grave robbing in general. So the electricity was definitely an ingredient of that phobia. And I'll just share this really fascinating fact. Julian Assange today is a modern day Prometheus. And there are many supporting details to that fact. But the most profound that just blew my mind, because Prometheus he gave fire to men, and then he gets cursed to be up on a rock, having his liver picked out by vultures or harpies for eternity, going on and on forever. Well, that is actually a cosmodrama. The constellation of Prometheus is Andromeda, who is chained to the rocks as a sacrificial offering, and it is on the Analema. That the station is located on the X, where it crosses over itself. So Prometheus is chained to the rocks on the first pass, and then when the Analema descends forever and ever, figure 8 is eternity. When it comes back to cross on his position in the zodiac, that location is a holiday, 827, which is called Vulturnalia, and it's they say that it's a river goddess, but it also has the word vulture in it. And so Prometheus has vultures descending to pick out his liver for eternity, which is the figure 8 of the Analema. And now go look at the flag, the coat of arms for Ecuador. He was in an Ecuadorian embassy. And if you look at the coat of arms of Ecuador, there's a big fucking vulture perched on their coat of arms. So for 7 years, he was chained like Prometheus in that embassy, getting his liver chewed out by the vulture of the Ecuadorian flag. And also on the flag is a ferry boat going across the river. The ferryman, Prometheus was the light bearer, the farrier.
That's super interesting. So what's the significance of Ecuador, though, in that sense? What did you find about Ecuador?
Well, I would just say that it's the equator. And the equator is where the scales... It's where the scales of judgment...
Oh, shit. And that's where he got put into imprisonment. Yeah. That's super interesting.
Yeah, man. So part of what the reward of finding these things, what it means to me is that, these things, they're too, these are stories. These are just stories, and they're too coincidental to be to be a coincidence. I think that I'm seeing, the hand of man's crafty work at play with these stories, which is great because now I don't feel so bad about what's happening to Julian Assange.
Yeah, no remorse.
LC King on recently, and he was talking about equestrian and horses and how the horses equate to equality because of the equestrian thing that going on there. Yeah.
Right. Yes.
Hey, I wanted to mention
which also pertains to Dan.
Shabba Dan.
Nice.
I wanted to mention some connections between giants and vampires. You guys are familiar with the Beowulf legend. Grendel was apparently a bloodsucker.
Oh.
And in addition, back with that myth of Bacchus, the Titans portrayed themselves as bulls, and they devoured Bacchus. And so there's some connections between the giants and vampirism. But also we failed to mention the incubus and the succubus.
Yes.
Right.
Demons.
I had that in my notes.
Yeah.
One fun little side note on Grendel. Anything mentioning Grendel is a metaphor for taking your arms. Grendel had his arms cut off.
Whoa.
So any story that has Grendel or name that invokes Grendel is actually an attack on your Second Amendment. Watch your back, y'all. Get your affidavits out.
Those arms. Okay.
Oh, shit. Nice.
Good connection right there. I also have a ton of stuff on vampires from India. If I could go through some quick notes on that.
Absolutely.
We got all the time
Dan
you
and
need.
I have a show. 5:30 we'll cap it off at 2.5 hours because Dan, we got to go record after this with an upcoming guest for RFTA.
All right.
Okay.
In the Hindu mythology, they have the Vetala, an evil spirit that haunts cemeteries and takes demonic possession of the corpses. They make their displeasure known by haunting humans and can drive people mad, kill children, and cause miscarriages. But they can also guard villages. Then we have the Pishachas. Pishachas are female, typically nocturnal, and hunt cremation grounds. They have red swollen eyes, bulging veins, and are flesh-eating demons. Kind of resembling of Kali Yuga, or Kali rather. Then we have the Nagas that we mentioned earlier, dragons of the underworld, or humanoids. The Chedipe or Chedip, word means prostitute, were witch vampires in folklore of the Godavari River region, associated with the Vitalas. And we also have the Rakta Sadhu, which were undead practitioners of the sadhana, also known as blood workers, thaumaturges. And we have the Daitas, were a heretical bloodline, Setite anti-tribu, Setite anti-tribu, bloodline of illusionists, thaumaturges, and also known as Rakta Sadhu, as I mentioned, and snake charmers, which are known as the Samperas. But the Rakta Sadhu would create blood donation camps, which were known as the Mihun Rakta Sadhu. Members of the Via Primordia religion in Sri Lanka is the seat of the Infinite Thunder's court of Kathayan vampires. So we have the Rakta Sadhu must engage in grueling austerities to unlock the specific powers of blood nectars, type of blood mystics and ascetics. So some of the oldest accounts of bloodletting go back to Hippocrates in ancient Egypt. And I think one of the oldest accounts is Lilith. Her husband, Aban, was a vampire. That goes all the way back to ancient Sumer. On a different note.
Damn, that's heavy. Yeah, Lilith is a really interesting connection that got brought up earlier that I thought was kind of fascinating to kind of, because in that creation story, she kind of became before Adam, right? And then it was supposed to be the matriarch, but then got switched and flipped, and she's the whore and what have you, but like deemed out and pushed into the shadows, and so kind of see that coming and paying homage here yet again. To find that super interesting. All the shit is super integrated into our history, and it's just like it's so crazy when we start to separate and then reattach all of the folklores and bring them back, and be like, hey, this wasn't so far-fetched, like let's look at this story again and bring it into what was actually happening at a real time in history and what might be happening now in a different way, shape, or form, with like the cosmodramas and all these things. And we can only go so deep, so in a 2.5 hour period, but I feel like we could probably come back around to this topic yet again, or bring back some awesome weaves into something. So now we gotta bring next week into some we gotta kind of like weave off of this and come up with a cool topic, because I like the way these Sundays have been progressing over the weeks. It's been really fun, and thank you guys for being a part of it, because it makes it really fucking fun to get even weirder on these topics. We're just like, all right, let's come up with a topic and then see how weird we can get with it,
Yeah. That we mentioned a lot of like the dark goddess figures, and something I like to point out around that dark feminine and why it's so fascinating, and it has staying power, and part of the reason that it has staying power is because with the female, you generally prefer to stay in the realm of logic and reason. You want to reason things out. You want to keep this intellectual. You want to talk things out. But the horror of the idea of a unreasonable, monstrous woman who is going against her life-giving nature means that you might have to lay hands on her. And that's horrifying for a man to think that this Medusa bitch is coming after me. I'm going to have to fucking fight a woman. And that absolutely goes against our nature as a man. So that gives it staying power. So it's very important to, I don't want to play into contributing to vilifying the feminine, but I also know that psychological value and the reason why these stories have stuck around for so long. Because if Medusa showed up in my house, I'd have to give her the chop because we're not going to be talking.
Just don't look at her. I don't mind vilifying women a little bit. So When I was listening to the book, the case studies of the vampire,
Oh,
it actually
God.
said that usually women were the ones that were considered to be vampires, not men. It was actually pretty unusual for men to be blamed for vampirism, and typically it had been a female thing. And I was watching this movie the other night called Trick or Treat, because it's Halloween and it's a new movie that came out. And in the movie, there is a coven of vampires who are all females, and one of them turns into a werewolf when she's like the queen bee of the coven. She turns into a werewolf while she's sucking the blood from this other guy. So I thought that was pretty interesting, because learning about like kind of this vampire stuff and then watching that, and it showed up in this movie that just was supposed to be about Halloween, but ended up having a coven of female vampires and then turning into the werewolf. I thought was pretty interesting. So there's that.
Makes sense though, because I think about like if you split this kind of like the war between vampires and lycanthropes, it's like werewolves and vampires, like these two things. But it seems like it said, like we said earlier, vampires have association with new moon, but the werewolves have association with full moon. So there's the masculine feminine kind of split, and it makes sense, like if the vampires have to be high echelons of magic, so like the witch association, and then you have the Reformation, which we didn't really even get into, but I wanted to get into like the witch burning, the Reformation, that time of
maybe we can get into that next week.
Yeah.
Witches.
Oh, totally should.
Oh, that's
Witches,
a good one.
That would be a great weave into that, actually. Yeah, because it would tie right into that, because they were hand in hand, like the transformation, whenever that transmutation is, the day or the night, maybe it's not just every day. Maybe that sunlight that they can't see is the full moonlight, maybe, and they have to stay, or I don't know.
They have to stay
know.
out of the light. They have to stay out of the light. So even on a full moon, or even when the moon's out, is still producing light. So they can only come out when the moon is not there.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah. And that's the silver bullet right there, man. That's the silver bullet they got to look out for.
Yeah.
Silver, the moon. Yeah, the moon is silver too, right? So they have to watch out for the moon.
Dude, homie, you really set this up in a beautiful way, man. This is so fun. This is so fun. This is so fun to have these conversations. Like, I always, I'll like go days after and I'll have a epiphany that was born out of what we're doing here, But you just set something up for me in my mind, because I've been considering the fact that Hollywood, which is Owlywood, the shape of the state is an owl shape. They've got the Bohemian Grove with the owl of Moloch over there. I consider Owlywood. Yep, I consider Owlywood in Owlifornia to be Boaz. That's one pillar on the East Coast, and I consider Jekyll Island.
I see. Oh shit!
Over in Gorgia, the Gorgon of Georgia is the Jakim.
Gorgon.
And so Jekyll Island is Jakim. California is Boaz. In Hollywood has literally lifted its roots and moved into Georgia. The devil has gone down to Georgia. And iconically, this is super profound. An alchemical wedding.
Texas.
What's that?
I thought they all went to Texas.
They're in Georgia because they can get away with their skirting the insurance.
The film industry is in Atlanta now, and
yeah,
that had a big impact on film on the East Coast. Comedy went with Joe Rogan to Austin, but not all of the comedians went to Austin. I mean, still a lot of comedy.
Elon Musk went to Texas also, though, and several
he set up down there.
Companies went over to Texas.
Yeah, but that's not Hollywood, though, man.
Right. But Texas is they're gearing up for secession. Texas is totally gearing up for secession. But what's profound about the owl going to the Gorgon, that is Athena and Medusa. and they are diametrically opposed. They are enemies of one another. Athena set up the plot to kill the Gorgon when she inspired Perseus to use his shield to decapitate the Gorgon. And then Athena literally used her head as a trophy. And so Athena's shield is a demigorgon's head on her shield. And what is fascinating is what you just said, homie, about the dark moon. The new moon is the darkness, the black. There is no moon there. And Athena would be the full moon, the shiny, brilliant one, the proud one. And so I think there's something to be said about the mythology of Athena, the owl. Her symbol is the owl versus the Gorgon, actually being played out metaphorically in the cycles of the moon in a really fascinating way. But I've been thinking about that a lot lately, that the owl is now married to the Gorgon in Georgia, and they've collapsed the two pillars.
I love that.
There's a California shirt that's called California, and it shows the owl and how it looks like it's the state of California, sitting perched with its tail feathers down. And then that's also right. Bohemian Grove is a little bit, it's near San Francisco, which is where they worship the owl.
Big time.
Yeah, in Hollywood, Jordan Maxwell ties in with the druidic magic wands being made of Hollywood.
I think in the vampire studies, when I was listening to that, it was a certain type of wood that they were using to
Hawthorne.
Kill these vampires. Yeah, it was hawthorn.
Yeah, the Serbians used hawthorn, and then the Russians used ash later.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, there was a story that I read of them trying to kill a vampire with it was that Juro guy, Juro something.
Yeah.
They tried to kill him with stakes, but they just bounced right off of him or whatnot because they were using the wrong type of wood.
And now the world is run by stakeholder capitalism. It's getting real. It's getting real.
All sucking off the teats.
The stakeholders, yeah, they're riding the back of the vampires ride the back of their wolves,
right?
Yeah.
You know what's crazy is go ahead.
Well, I'm still like spinning at our revelation of the fact that Adolf Hitler's name is the head wolf. Ed Wolf, Adolf Hitler. It was there under everybody's nose all along, and his headquarters was called the Wolf's Lair was the name of his headquarters. It was very obvious back then, but we seem to have forgotten about the mystical implications of these words. These titles that were in plain sight. It's all in plain sight.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. And yeah, the wolf plays such a huge part in that dichotomy between vampires and wolves. That lore between them is it's almost like these bloodlines, families fighting back, these magical families that have been fighting for centuries to have powers in different regions. And, they're part of just a deeper culture that we're just unaware of here on the lay level, because when you're high up in that part of money, when money doesn't, when you create the money, right? You're working on different levels. Your lives are 100, your game plans, the kids, you're completely sheltered, and we're sheltered in our own way from that. And I think that's what these folklore stories are really alluding to, is the higher echelons of these really, really ritualistic and rich families kind of just run the entire makings of reality.
Mm-hmm. I just want to say that I think next week is set. We're going to go into witches, and Mark and Gabe, you're always invited back whenever you would like to come on. We do this Sundays at 3. And for everybody listening also, next topic is witches. So if you guys want to dig up anything and join us on the show and talk about it, feel free to jump on and tell us what you know about witches, and then maybe we can get into. I like this language thing and what's in a name, and maybe that will take a little bit longer to kind of go through a little bit. So maybe we can keep that in the back of our mind and kind of think about that a little bit and how we can relate that into a show and get into that too. But I like that. So thank you, Indy, and thanks, Mark. Thanks, Gabe. Thank you, Roman, always. If anybody wants to give any shout outs of where the people listening can find you or hear you, do it now.
My family thinks I'm crazy.com. Search that in any podcast app. Find us on YouTube. And I gotta say, I got a little distracted here. I was trying to do some research and I got pulled into this crew rabbit hole. And I want to just say one thing or two things. A, I'm gonna do a whole series on this because it connects to some stuff I've been researching. I'm gonna do some sort of video project on this. But I'll say this for you guys. In 2020, and keep in mind the Mardi Gras parades happen in March. Everybody knows what happened in March 2020, right? We don't have to repeat that. Well, the theme for the Rex parade in 2020 was omens and auguries.
Oh, fucking fuck. Oh my fuck.
So this is what the Rex parade, the Royals were bringing in with their parade ritual festivities. That was their theme in 2020. Only a week or two before everything happened, they were parading with the theme omens and auguries, and the crew of Proteus was their theme was feasts and libations. So very strange themes in the year 2020, and I think Mardi Gras is one of those occult-laden Americanas that many people overlook.
Okay, I gotta give. I'm just gonna
we'll get
spill everything on you, Mark. I'm gonna spill it all on you, and you do with it what you want. Okay, you said the magic word, man. You said the magic word. So, CIA in Twilight language translates to see and trail and tell a jinn's agency. All right. So they're reading auguries before they do an event. And I can confirm this even more because the constellation of the augur, which its name is like Neter, Neter, was its Egyptian name. It's been eclipsed culturally twice. It changed from the augur, the augur reader in Egyptian. They then, in the industrial age, it became the augur, as in a drill, like a drill press. And then they eclipsed the same constellation. Today, its name is microscopium. And so when you send in your blood to get analyzed, they are reading the auguries of your DNA. And they're putting it under the microscope. And all of this debacle from 2020 is thank you very much to the microscope. In the abbreviation for microscopium, that constellation, which is in Sagittarius, poke, Sagittarius, the poke.
The stakeholder. The stakeholder.
The abbreviation for microscopium is MIC. That's the military industrial complex, KEYMOUSC. It's the Mickey Mouse Club, y'all. These guys are augury readers. And that constellation, the augur, I believe it's Neter. I'll link you on that constellation so you can go down and fill that in because, bro, these guys, we know that they are running drills before events. Well, guess what we're actually saying? We've always been saying they are reading the augurs before the events. They're reading the entrails of serpents. That's the name of the Vatican. Vatican means divining serpent. It's all there in the language. We just are missing the cultural context of it. So you just blew my brain with that one.
Yeah, dude. We got to get you on Esoteric America. I should shout that out as well to
nice.
Get some territory, some tarot.
Oh yes, absolutely.
Gnosis infused in that show. But if people haven't checked that out, Esoteric America, we got a new episode coming out. We just had Steven Snyder, aka Recluse, on the show, and he broke it all down Wisconsin is a weird place.
Oh yeah.
I don't recommend anyone
Yes.
to Wisconsin. No offense to anyone that lives there, never been there, maybe likes to vacation there. I would say pause all plans to go to Wisconsin and listen to this episode first. But thanks for having me, guys. I'll be back.
I have
for future Sundays for sure.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I have
Mark, great to see you,
one more
brother.
thing to add. I watched this YouTube video called "This 22 Event Just Revealed the Antichrist to the World," and in it, it's these games that were done in England and Great Britain, and King Charles was presiding over it, and he got handed some scrolls. The whole event was seen from outer space. It starts out from outer space of a comet exploding into a bunch of fragments. The guy in the video says 71 fragments or 72 fragments, 70 fragments, something to that effect. And
that's the
all
number
of these fragments turn into crystals, and each person goes out, picks up this fragment that exploded as a crystal and takes it back with them to their house. Then all their houses appear over these games, and then they descend out of the houses and onto the ground and form a circle around this giant bowl, this mechanical giant bowl that walks into the arena.
Mhm.
And then the one main girl, she
Classic.
gets up and climbs on top of the bowl like the Whore of Babylon.
Yep.
And then all of these crystals start to come together and spiral up the Tower of Babel to the top, where they all collect and turn into like a giant disco ball or a bright light. And from there, it kind of ends. But
wait, what is this?
it's like a symbolism of the Tower of Babel being reborn
Performance
in these games, basically. Yeah,
Okay.
and it
I
takes
missed this
place
part.
at the opening ceremonies of these games that are being held in Great Britain right now.
Oh, this
Yeah, I
game's
saw
happening
that.
right now in Great Britain. I'm not even aware of this at all.
Yeah, man,
I
they're
just
still.
happened upon it on YouTube.
Yep,
I
they're
was
still
like,
up
what
and
the fuck?
they're totally up and running. You know, one last thing, Mark, on the augurs thing, because man, you really lit my mind up. Once upon a time, not long ago, Christopher Knowles said a very passing comment. I was just listening to him. I think he was on Aeon Byte, and he just very passively says, you know, the title of president comes from the master of ceremonies, from the Roman augury readers. The head augury reader was called the president. So we're still using that word. And then he says, and back in those days, they were so superstitious. You know, the augury readers, they were infallible. They were not elected. You couldn't question them. And if they said to do something, you had to jump exactly how high. And Chris Knowles just says very passively, he says, you know, in like, let's say that the Roman emperor, he stumbles up the steps on his way up to the Senate. Well, the augury readers, they would have a meeting, and then they would tell the emperor, yo, man, you got to cancel that war campaign. You got to change. You got to turn on a dime, and you got to do it today. Well, Chris Knowles just happened to say that about a week after Joe Biden tripped up the stairs on his way to up Air Force One, and then we pulled out of Afghanistan. And I don't know if he knows that that connection is there, but he was revealing it in a very passive way, and I was making the connection that we just saw that happen in real life. So the augury readers are a big deal, y'all. Big deal.
Wow.
Very cool. Thank you. Wow.
Yeah, man. I think that's why all the news agencies are like Fox and the Peacock, and we have these, you know, these sacred animals in our news agencies. But all right, I'm done. I can't even handle it. That's so crazy.
I laugh
so
every
crazy.
time. I
Love
laugh
the
every
enthusiasm,
time
man.
I watch Peacock because it basically just is small cock. Why would you name your fucking thing small cock? I don't know. But
So I'm over
you
on
could tell, Feather.
Pea-sized.
Yeah. I'm over on YouTube, Slick Distance, my channel. I just got myself way in over my head recently, doing the Enneagram with the Greek pantheon, and then using it like a lens, like a decoder glasses. And I'm taking on Star Wars, and all of a sudden I have like a much deeper and more profound grasp for the tarot in a really fascinating way. So It's kind of cantankerous and cumbersome at the moment. I call it a shared learning experience. And I just stumbled into some shit on my own channel that I'm like, start to scare myself a little bit. But I'm actually getting ready. This is all preliminary work because over on One Podcast, we're going to do a show on Star Wars. We're going to de-occult Star Wars. And I think I found kind of like the Matrix code to George Ophi Lucas's mindset and what he was infusing into that cornerstone of culture.
Wow.
The intergalactic Chewbacca.
Yeah, man.
Andy.
I mean, sci-fi is the ultimate code, so I love that, man. The ultimate way to enshroud the mystery. So I'm looking forward to that show.
Tell people where they can find you, Indy.
All right. Thanks for being on the show tonight, guys. You can find me at Indy Sage on Facebook.com, Ross Sentinel on Instagram, or you can check out my blog at vibetribescribe.wordpress.com. Check me out.
And Indy is now in the Rising from the Ashes Telegram, dropping some knowledge in there too. So if you want to get a chance to talk to him, come check it out. And can we all hit the tag on 3? If you guys are not down with that. 1, 2, 3. Wake up. You guys are all supposed to do it. Come on, man.